Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is Brandon from Free State, Colorado, and I hope you're doing well. We're well into the 2026 campaign season, and I encourage you to show up at candidate forums, campaign events, debates. Find other people in your community, in your city, even your neighborhood who are interested in the same kind of things you are and are willing to get involved this election cycle. We need this grassroots, precinct level effort to really flip seats here in Colorado. We have to do it ourselves. We are the leaders that we've been waiting for. But, I want to talk about money today. That's one of the biggest stories in politics always. And I love tracking where the money's coming from, where it's going, and who's raising it. That's one of the big questions. So we're going to look at the most recent campaign finance data. The campaign finance reports come out quarterly, basically. That schedule will speed up a little bit or shrink, I guess is one way to put it, as we get closer to the November election. But as of right now, the most recent campaign finance report for statewide candidates in Colorado came in on January 15th, 2026. This is data from October 1st through December 31st, 2025. And what these numbers show really tell us a lot about the race in terms of the front runners and who has the best chance, I would say, ultimately. So let's start with the Republican candidates for governor, of course. One of the most talked about campaigns here in Colorado is Victor Marks, 620,962 and 75 cents. That's how much money he's raised from October to December. And that's a lot of money, folks, 100%. But it just goes to show that he has a reach and a network of donors outside of Colorado. Now, he says he's raised money from all 64 counties in Colorado. I wouldn't doubt it. But at the same time, I think that Victor Marks has connections to a larger conservative network that is really going to help him fundraise money throughout the rest of this election cycle. $620,000 in 3 months, folks, lots of money. In second place was Barb Kirkmeyer, state senator, former county commissioner. I would say probably the most qualified person for the race based on her experience serving on the joint budget committee, serving in our state government, being a county commissioner. She knows all this like the back of her hand. Doesn't necessarily mean she's going to win. We got to see what's going to happen, right? But $192,888.20. So lots of money there. Good chunk of change, really respectable for somebody who probably doesn't have the same kind of connections that somebody like Victor Marks does, right? Who's connected to this kind of conservative right Christian ecosystem across the entire country. He's been on some of the biggest podcasts out there. Barbara Kirkmeyer doesn't quite have that. She's really more focused in Colorado, and ultimately, I think that's a good thing in a lot of respects, right? So $192,000, nothing to shake a stick at. And we got Scott Bottoms, who's probably the most grassroots conservative candidate out there. All these candidates have their own strengths, right? They all have their own weaknesses. They're all individual human beings like all of us. So I'm not trying to play favorites, but I got to tell you, Scott Bottoms has an incredible record in our state legislature, in our state house. He has an incredible, strong, pro-liberty conservative record, and he's willing to say stuff that maybe not all the other candidates are. It's really refreshing, and I know a lot of grassroots people are really excited about his campaign. He raised $37,459 in that 3 month period. Not a ton of money. Of course, that's something that may be concerning to his supporters, but it is what it is. Jason Mikesell, number 4, the Teller County Sheriff. I had an interview with him last year. I really encourage you to check it out. I was really impressed by a lot of his answers, his thoughtfulness, and really presenting things in a way that I hadn't heard from a lot of other people. So very interesting person. Sheriff, I think he's got a great record in terms of enforcing immigration law, enforcing some of the other anti-criminal or pro-law and order type of policies. I think he'd be good at that. He only raised $6,000, though, in a 3 month period. That's pretty tough. That's pretty tough out there, you know? Then we had Jason Clark. Never even heard that name before. You probably may be watching this one the same way. He raised $1,365. And then Robert Moore, $189.60. Now, the other candidates, there's about 20 Republican candidates running for governor. They were all below that number. So a lot of them were at zero. Now, some of them just announced. Don't get me wrong. But nonetheless, we're well into the campaign season. And going into 2026 with a big bank account can make a huge difference. That's just what they raised for that 3 month period from October through December, right? Now, who raised the most on the Democratic side? Well, you got Phil Weiser and Michael Bennett relatively neck and neck. Obviously, Phil Weiser came ahead $827,585.78 to Michael Bennett's $784,487.47. Man, that is a lot of money, even more money than Victor Marx raised, and just goes to show the connection that the Democrats have to these big donor networks outside of Colorado and inside of Colorado, right? The Democratic Party has built infrastructure. They've built an organization. They built an entire network that can raise money, mobilize volunteers, and help get candidates elected. That is why they control the Colorado state government. I mean, that's the reality of it, folks. And of course, connections to big Democratic donors outside of Colorado are a huge reason why they're raising so much money. Huge amounts of money, right? So relatively neck and neck, I would say, relatively neck and neck for that time period. It is interesting to see Phil Weiser kind of pull ahead, but that's not the whole story as we're going to see here. So that's how much they raised. How much money do they have going into 2026, right? How much cash on hand do they have at the end of that reporting period? So they may have raised a lot of money. They may have spent a lot of money as well. Victor Marks still leading the pack, $348,020.83. It's a lot of cash to have on hand. It's also a pretty high burn rate. Looking at his campaign finance spending, a lot of consultants, a lot of different things that he spent the money on, paying some different agencies and this and that. Maybe he's building up his campaign infrastructure, getting the right people in place. I don't know all the details, of course. Campaign finance reports only tell you where the money's going, give you an idea of what it's for, but they don't really give you that whole picture. So nonetheless, he still has nearly $350,000 on hand going into 2026. Good chunk of change. He's definitely going to need it and a lot more, I think, especially when you look at the Democrat candidates. Barb Kirkmeyer, even though she didn't raise quite enough, as much, excuse me, in December, she still has a lot of money on hand. So a lot slower burn rate, I would say. She's spending that money a lot more conservatively with $272,971.30 cash on hand at the end of 2025. So still a respectable number. She definitely has some connections, right? Robert Moore, interesting. Don't really know anything about him, but he's in third place right now from the data I saw on the campaign finance reports on Tracer. He loaned himself basically all of that money, $200,000. He gave himself a personal loan. You can loan money to your campaign. The idea being you can take it back if things don't work out. So, you got to think, what's that money going to be used for? Does anybody know who he is? Maybe that's what he's going to spend the money on. Number four, Jason Clark. Now, this was interesting because he's got $124,000 in the bank. But I had to go back over like 10 years worth of campaign finance reports. This guy runs for governor, it seems like every single time. And that money is exact same dollar amount over 10 years ago. So no new money's coming in. It's left over from campaigns long time ago. So interesting stuff for sure. But nonetheless, I don't think he's got as big of a chance. Jason Mikesell at $24,591.71 cash on hand. Not a ton, not a ton. Kind of very similar to the trend of him, how much he raised versus how much he has on hand. And then we got Scott Bottoms here with $9,266 cash on hand. So of course, he raised some money and then spent a lot of that money, which is what you got to do, right? That's why you raise it to spend it. So not too shocking there, but nonetheless, to see less than $10,000 cash on hand going into 2026 for Scott Bottoms, especially as he's in the legislative session for the next 4 months. It's going to be a little bit tough, maybe tougher to raise that money. I don't know how that's going to look, but nonetheless, somebody like Victor Marks, he's not serving in our state government. Barb Kirkmeyer, Scott Bottoms are. Victor Marks can go out and raise that money and focus on that. Now, the Democrats, cash on hand. Phil Weiser, $3.474 million cash on hand. Wow. And Michael Bennett with $1.6 million cash on hand. A lot of money cash on hand. These people are ready for this big fight, this statewide election here in 2026. And I was a little shocked at first to see Phil Weiser have so much money just because, hey, he's an attorney general. He's not like charismatic. He's not that interesting. He's attached to a lot of bad policy. But nonetheless, he buys into all of the Democratic talking points of fighting Trump and this and that, lawsuit every single week against the Trump administration. And then Michael Bennett is much more connected, right? I mean, he's an East Coast establishment Democrat. His family has long been tied to the Democratic Party. His dad served in the presidency, in a president's office, and this and that. You can read all of that at my website. I have a whole detailed breakdown of Michael Bennett and who he is and how he's connected to some of the biggest East Coast establishment Democratic organizations out there, really interesting stuff, but nonetheless not raising quite as much for his campaign. Now, this is just campaigns, folks. This is just campaigns. So let's go ahead and take a look at unaffiliated candidate Greg Lopez, formerly a Republican. He recently disaffiliated to the criticism of many in the Republican Party. But during this campaign reporting season from October 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025, he only raised $9,241.79. You know, seems like a nice enough guy, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to imagine why he's still in the race at this point. Just my personal thoughts. You're not going to be the Republican candidate. You're not raising a lot of money. Not sure what's going on there. Cash on hand, $5,041 cash on hand at the end of this reporting cycle going into the year. Hard to think he's going to be able to raise a lot of money as an unaffiliated candidate, but I don't know. We'll see. Now, folks, this is just the campaign spending, right? I want to talk a little bit about some of the PACs. So these political action committees, independent expenditure committees, whatever you want to call them, they bring in a lot of money and they can do outside spending. They have basically unlimited fundraising capabilities compared to the governor's campaign, which does have a campaign contribution limit. So you'll see a lot of these big checks go to these PACs set up to support these candidates. And the big caveat is these PACs cannot coordinate with the candidates themselves, but otherwise can basically do any type of electioneering campaigns. So we'll see how that money goes here. So Rocky Mountain Way was created to support Michael Bennett's campaign. It has currently nearly $3.3 million on hand. Wow. So even though Michael Bennett doesn't have quite as much in the bank as Phil Weiser for his campaign, the people supporting his campaign on the outside have $3,287,361.46. A big chunk of change that they are going to spend to try and support his campaign. Michael Bloomberg is the biggest donor in Colorado politics right now, which is crazy. This New York billionaire trying to have total control and influence of our lives. Of course, extremely anti-gun, trying to ban sodas and junk food and all the rest. Gosh, what a busybody. But $1.25 million. $1.25 million going into Rocky Mountain Way to support Michael Bennett, his buddy apparently. Brighter Future Colorado is a nonprofit. I believe it's a 501c4, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. But a nonprofit, so they don't have to disclose their donors, but a nonprofit can give a certain percentage of their revenue to a political action committee, and $550,000 is a big chunk of change. Of course, we don't know where all that money's coming from. And Rocky Mountain Way is being run by the MBA Consulting Group. So that's to support Michael Bennett. Lots of money in the bank. Now, of course, Phil Weiser has his own PAC supporting him, and that is Fighting for Colorado PAC. So when you see those disclosures on those campaign ads, and it says paid for by Fighting for Colorado, paid for by Rocky Mountain Way, now you're going to know who they are, right? So they have $527,210.88 in the bank, all from individual donors. There's some $50,000 checks in there. It looks like $30,000 from some equity people and this and that, but really a lot smaller amounts donated. So ultimately, Michael Bennett does have more money behind his campaign, generally speaking. And of course, a big chunk of that's from Michael Bloomberg. So that's very interesting. Ashley Stevens, who I've talked about plenty of times, is the registered agent on that one. There is one called the Freedom IEC. It looks like they've raised $1,000 to support Victor Marx. One of the news articles, and I'll link them all at freestatecolorado.com, of course, said there was another PAC out there supporting Victor Marx, but I didn't see anything on Tracer. So nonetheless, very interesting to see all the other money coming in to support these candidates. So I got to say, the front runners, in my mind, the numbers don't lie, right? It's not just in my opinion, but the big front runners on fundraising, and really ultimately the front runners for the whole campaign would be Victor Marx and Barb Kirkmeyer on the Republican side, and then Michael Bennett and Phil Weiser, of course, on the Democratic side. I think there's some other Democrats running, but nobody's really too concerned that they're going to make it very far. So, of course, on the Republican side is the biggest question, and we'll see. We'll see on the Democrat side which one of those ends up winning, Bennett or Weiser. Not entirely sure which one's worse. I have to think that Weiser is worse, but hard to say exactly. I'd say it's also worth considering Scott Bottoms as a candidate to make it through convention. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to drop out. I think he's a man of conviction and strength, and there's a lot of people who support his conservative grassroots leadership as a state legislator. So I think he has a really good chance of winning the state convention in April from the Republican side. Not sure that he's the most winnable candidate overall based on the money, but in terms of grassroots support and individual support from Colorado's grassroots Republicans, I think Scott Bottoms is the leader there, right? So I would say he's probably most likely to win at the state convention, which is why Barb Kirkmeyer and Victor Marks are definitely petitioning on the ballot. Maybe they're also running through caucus. I don't know all those numbers, but I understand they are petitioning. So I want to share a little bit from the Denver Post about some of the other races here. Those are all the governor campaigns, but looks like we have some big numbers coming for the Secretary of State. Jenna Griswold running for Attorney General. She's raised almost twice as much what the next nearest candidate has, nearly $1.5 million. Hatel Doshi, I don't know who that is, has raised $751,000 though, which is wild, right? To think a Democratic candidate with that very few people have probably heard of has raised more money than really any of the Republicans on the governor's race. Very interesting stuff. Griswold had more than $1 million in the bank as of December 31st. Then we have attorney David Seligman, who is a far left socialist. Really do not want him to win. This guy is bad news, that's for sure. He's raised about $690,000, while Boulder County District Attorney Michael Doherty has raised about $580,000, and I have to say, out of all those candidates, Michael Doherty might be the best Democrat in the race. Not saying very much, don't get me wrong, still want to see a Republican win. But no Republican had reported raising any money in the Attorney General's race. The sole current GOP candidate, Colorado Springs District Attorney Michael Allen, just declared his candidacy this month here in January. So I'm really hoping that Michael Allen can pull in some big fundraising numbers. He's definitely the best choice, I think, out there. I really do not want to see Jenna Griswold or David Seligman win. They probably can't. I'd probably be worse out of anybody. I think those two would be. Looking at that same article at the Denver Post here, they talk about treasurer. So Jeff Bridges, I think he's the most likely Democratic nominee. He raised about $350,000 during this reporting period. State Representative Brianna Titone, gosh. The only other candidate to have raised more than six figures in the race did not have a campaign finance report for the most recent filing period available on the Secretary of State's website. That's right, Titone's report was delinquent, had not been filed, at least at the time of filming this video. I double checked. The Denver Post didn't see it there either. And then Jefferson County Treasurer Jerry DiTullio raised about $46,000, but he's loaned his campaign $458,000. Wow. Loaned himself $458,000 for that race. Now, just a loan, so maybe he'll get that money back if he doesn't go very far. I think Jeff Bridges is the favorite there on the Democratic side. Fremont County Commissioner Kevin Grantham, definitely encourage you to watch my recent interview with him. I'm really excited about his campaign. Former state Senate president, served on the Joint Budget Committee, really understands the state finances, unlike many people. He's the only Republican to raise any money for the treasurer's race with $50,000 reported. I'd love to see that number go up, but that's where he ended up at the end of 2025. The Democratic race for Secretary of State remains relatively close on the cash front. Jefferson County Clerk Amanda Gonzalez raised about $144,000 to State Senator Jesse Danielson's $133,000. So, gosh, we'll see where it goes there on the Secretary of State side. And then for the Republicans, no Republican had reported raising any money for the Secretary of State's campaign at the end of 2025. So you can see the Democrats have a huge cash advantage overall in really all of these campaigns. I mean, astronomical numbers ultimately, but it's going to take a lot of grassroots support, a lot of individuals like you watching this video to get involved on these campaigns and really make the most of it. Money helps, but it doesn't determine everything in politics, right? So just want to leave you with this today. Here's some of the different campaign finance reporting deadlines. So the next one we're going to see is from May 4th. So we'll do another video on this on May 4th, right after May 4th when that report comes out. And that's going to be the reporting period from January 1st of 2026 this year through the end of April. So April 29th, 2026. And that report is due on May 4th. We'll do another video then. And then you can see there's a May 18th report. So wow, that comes out pretty quick. June 1st, June 15th, June 29th. So every couple of weeks. Then August 3rd. September 8th, September 21st. So really reports speed up pretty quick as we get close to the election to really keep people informed about who's spending money on these candidates, who's contributing, and where these candidates spending their money. It is an important part of politics for us to understand where this money is coming from and where it's going. So really appreciate you joining me today. It's going to be an interesting 2026 election season, but ultimately it's going to be people like you watching this who are going to make the difference. So get involved, please, and let's see what we can do. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.